All right, great. Thanks, guys. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. I wanted to talk today about these black eyes. Um, these people aren't being punched. This is something interesting, and it led me to look into a lot of what the eye is all about, what it means, how it works, um, what its parts are, what exactly it does, and it's important to realize that the eye stretches all the way before the eye even does anything. Before it even does anything, it 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 crosses over the opposite side of the brain, and it does a lot of crap. It integrates with a lot of systems before it gets back here to actually even start processing what it's seeing. All right, there's a lot happening there, like visual area of the thalamus. It's the amygdala, the hippocampus are are um, are checkpoints in the retina. And as we understand what that means, we start to uncover what sight is, like what what realistically audio actually, visual input actually means. And it's because these guys were bold enough to have these rituals out in public. It's because of that that even got me questioning the eye. I've always just thought the eye just shows you what's in the world. That's all. It What else is there to do, right? I mean, it sounds a really awesome organ, but what exactly is it? And as you look into the rods and cones, you can start there. That's your level one is rods and cones. But then you start to read more about them. You start to fathom that there's this thing called macular vision and peripheral vision, and that these are two different things. That seeing in the center here is your macular vision, while this outer edge is a completely different system. And then when you start to unravel things like sensory timing, believe it or not, different people have different sensory timing in their are sight and sound out of sync? New research suggests speech comprehension improves with a slight auditory delay in some individuals. It these are all these links are in the description, by the way. The What I'm getting at is that each of us actually have different delays. Our sight and our audio are slowed down or sped up in different ways depending on the person. It's very similar to I was born with 54/20 eyesight, nearsighted. It's a certain rating, right? Each of us have our own eyesight too. And we call this, oh, well, it's because, you're fucked up. You're fucked up. That's why. Your vision isn't perfect. That's why. No one ever assumes, why does this person need to see the world in 54/20? Why does this other person need to see it in 15/20? What is there is this a just a fuck up, a mistake? Or is there something else to vision itself? Is Are we born with blurry vision because our system knows? Our system understands how vision truly works. And that's what I'm hoping that we can just scratch the surface of today. The center of you has never been discussed. When I say the center of we need to understand that we are dealing with not minute time. It's microscopically, it's more than minute. And we can't divide time. Like right now, we digitize sound. And if we have sound at enough resolution, we can play you what it sounds like to listen to Miles Davis. We can play that sound for you, by dividing it up into a million chunks. And at each chunk, take a temperature. Each chunk, take a temperature. Each chunk, take a temperature. But that's not the same as actually listening to Miles Davis play. He's creating a real life sine wave. It's not a digitized, it's a real life sine wave. And when he offers you a real life sine wave in live music, you have the ability to choose which scoops of oscillations you want to ingest and swallow as the sound comes out. You are your own digitizer, and you digitize the world through this perception that we think is our eyes and our ears. That's the digitizing part. Okay, that's a high resolution MP3 of Miles Davis, and most of us have no idea that it's any different. Most of us could not tell the difference because we've been around this so long between a live performance and a digitized performance. And friends, inside your head right now, you have these things called eyes. And you're under the impression that they are showing you the true sine wave of the world. And they're not. They are digitizing that world. Not only are they digitizing it, they are compressing it. And not only are they compressing it, they're running it past the amygdala and saying, hey, I'm about to show this dude this picture. You cool with this? And that amygdala looks at that picture and it's like, holy fuck, you cannot show this guy this. And the amygdala pulls out its pen and he starts drawing X's. All right? He's censoring that picture. And he hands it back to your optic nerve and says, okay, now go show him. And it walks back and it shows us. And we are like Plato's cave. We are inside this allegorical cave, but it's a biological cave. We are inside, we are down in our optic nerves, my friends. We have crawled down into the cave, the allegoric cave of our optic nerves, and we're sitting inside our retinas. That blind spot you see, that's our ass, set comfortably inside our optic nerve, and we are looking out and we are pretending that this is what the world is. That it is the reflection of the bounce back of these rods and cones that pass through 4 or 5 different filters to get to where they are right now before they could show it to us. And one of those filters was the nun named Amygdala. It's our Catholic school nun teacher who has sanitized the picture for you. And she's doing that because she loves you. She's doing that because you freak the fuck out if she shows you certain things. And she learned that when you were born. That lesson began when you were born. The moment you were born, you started seeing things. And those things were either difficult to process or they were just wonderful to process. And you learn the power of sight by being nudged and guided by this nun, by this amygdala. And she has helpers. And those helpers are dopamine, serotonin, and melanin. Melanin itself. Now, melanin we think of as a pigment. Well, it's here to color your skin. It's here to give your skin different colors. And melanin is inside the iris. It's responsible for the color of your eyes. And melanin, if you don't have enough, the sun gives you cancer. That's what we've been told. That's pretty much the extent of how we understand what melanin is. Spiders don't have melanin. They don't. It's one of the few animals that doesn't require this first filter. I'm telling you that melanin is a black spot. It is the mind has a squid in it, and the mind has the octopus in it, and that octopus will secrete black ink when something's chasing it. If you scare the octopus, you're going to get inked. And that's what melanin's role is inside the body, inside the retinas, to be more exact. So here's a diagram of the retina, and you'll see that the retina, just in case you don't know, is this concaved shape that holds the eye, and it's covered in rods and cones. Most of our rods are around the outside perimeter in this sort of darker red area. And then in the very center, in the very, very tiny part of the center, we have all of our cones. Now, your rods are going to detect your black and white. If you've ever shot photography, this is called raw footage. You're perceiving every pixel. Each of these rods and cones is capable of like one photon. That's how precise they are. And we think that that's what gives us sight, but it's actually not really what gives us sight. The rods and cones are antennas. They're living antenna that's granting us the ability to pick up data. Here's a better one. To pick up data and then apply it through a filter called melanin. The very first thing it has to do is go through the retinal pigment epithelium, RPE, this right here. You'll notice in this diagram, and you don't have to see this, podcasters, it's okay. The rods and cones are actually backwards. Rods and cones do not point out, guys. Here's where the light comes in. They don't point out. They're not out here receiving light, guys. I know that. I hope that you were as okay. I don't hope that you were as ignorant as me. I assume that many of you were as ignorant as I was, and you just naturally assumed that the rods and cones were pointing out inside the eye to give us a better view of the light that's pouring into our retinas. And the answer is no. Actually, it's they're technically they're pointed backwards. You have this system of ganglion bipolar cells that connect to the back of the rods and cones. And the rods and cones are now injected into this RPE, this membrane. But this membrane is heavily influenced by dopamine and melanin. Here it is. Here's the pigment epithelium. All right. Light has to come through this system and is then processed here. But it's only processed here while it's surrounded in a dark room of melanin distributed through epithelium. And how is that distributed? Through dopamine. Through dopamine channels. It's actually dopamine channels that do this. Now, what I'm getting at is the eyes are only going to render what they're willing to see. And this is an important reason. Your eyes are always freaking burning. They're always on. One of the most heavy oxygen exchanges is happening in your eyes by the destruction and regeneration of your rods and cones. It's, if you can imagine it, inside your retina, maybe picture a billion light bulbs, and they're constantly being burnt out, constantly, and they're constantly being replaced. I think it's like every day. Each rod and cone is replacing itself. May not be that. Prove my lips. I insert one lie in every live stream. The statement I just told you could be that lie. There could be more. Okay, so it takes about a day to we're constantly regenerating this. We're constantly burning this system in place. All right. Now this system is heavily regulated by dopamine. And that dopamine is only going to happen and flow after it asks the permission of the amygdala. And the amygdala is the center of your fear. How you react to something is processed by that system. Thanks, Terry Elrod. Thank you, James, for helping us to see. It's cool because this is not even how we see. The eye of Ra is your confidence. The eye of Ra is your confidence, and I'm hoping that's going to come out as I explain this more. All right. So dopamine triggers dopa. This dopa interacts with melanin, and I'm reading my notes here. UV rays generate plaque metagenesis, absorb lights, rods, low light activates. Okay. I think the best way to explain this is to show you this. This is an abstract. There's about 12 links in the video description. This is just one of them. I'm not going to bore you with all this, but the coexistence of oculocutaneous albinism with schizophrenia. All right. You guys, an albino, someone that you would call an albino, has a deficit of melanin. But that deficit of melanin is caused by the overgenesis of melanin, metagenesis of melanin. It's the albino. The albino is unable to push black ink, okay? Like the octopus, it doesn't have that defense mechanism to squirt black ink. All right? It's, even though its amygdala has its own fear center, the amygdala maybe, and I have to say the word maybe here, the amygdala maybe contacts back to the RPE, the membrane inside the retina, and says, dude, this is way too intense. I need you to black out some of this shit. It's too much. And the albino says, you got it. I'll do it. And it tells the captain, it tells the nun, I blacked the crap out of it, man. I went into that guy's classroom and I painted every window black, every door black. I painted the walls black. That guy's never been more exposed to black. Don't worry, he doesn't see a thing. And the nun's like, why is he still freaking out? And your dopamine's like, I don't know. Or your melanin's like, I don't know. I've done my job. I'll do it again. Okay, let me go do it again. And so albinism creates schizophrenia. It creates this abstract. Increased melanin production and the production of hallucinogenic agents. Keep in mind, this abstract thinks that you're hallucinating. Okay? This is a major fault, guys. Sorry. And there's a lot of weird tangents here. Real quick. A hallucination is a sheep flying a space shuttle, eating macaroni as it stretches out from meatball on top of Old Smoky. On top of Old Smoky, what I just said is not a hallucination. In other words, the last three words I say built off the previous one. A monkey in a parachute jumps out of a plane at night singing Dixie. That is not a hallucination. The clinical definition of hallucination does not have a temporal timeline to it. It is not built off itself, off itself, off itself. Okay? A hallucination is a complete signal overload. And the mind doesn't know what it's processing. So it randomly pieces things together, but not in a temporal way, Do you understand? You can't have the monkey and then put a jacket on the monkey. That's not hallucination. That is you imagining a monkey with a jacket, or you were physically doing something with your brain. All right. You're perceiving something. All right. So when you hear the word production of hallucinogenic agent, I want you to treat that as you're watching science make mistakes. Okay. You're watching science give lithium, and you'll read in this article, he freaking gives them lithium. That's his solution. This patient, well, actually, before I say that, following the discovery of schizophrenic albinos, several researchers have instead wondered whether schizophrenia and albinism could actually be genetically linked. Okay, basically, this abstract was trying to prove the opposite, and it ended up proving the opposite of its own thesis. Now, this patient was hospitalized after his mother discovered the existence of a BB that was lodged in his forehead from a failed suicide attempt in response to command auditory hallucinations. Okay. BB was removed from his hospitalization. He was stabilized with a combination of lithium, I don't know, risperidone, and basically they gave him lithium. All right. Those with schizophrenia had increased levels of melanogenesis, that's the making of melanin, and thus proposed the following hypothesis. In schizophrenic patients, the synthesis of melatonin from serotonin is defective, and as a result, this is production of a hallucinogenic agent and an increase in melanin production. They made up the words, this is the production of a hallucinogenic agent. Okay? They made that up. That part is pure speculation. And I can prove it. I can prove it because if you look at, there's not one instance ever, it's never, ever, ever, ever been proven that adding a chemical to someone's body fixes paranoid schizophrenia. Not once has that ever, ever been proven. However, that is exactly what we do to every single schizophrenic patient that we have. What I'm proposing is that schizophrenics do what African culture says they do. They see things we don't. What I'm proposing is that everyone who has auditory hallucinations, visual hallucinations, everyone who's seen voices, everyone who's seen a ghost, everyone who's seen things that no one else sees, from the Cherokee Moon-Eyed people to the Tarahumara Indians, to fairies, to the tiny serpent creatures in India, to UFOs, to Bigfoot, to Sasquatch, to dragons, to gods walking on the earth. All of these are real, but what we see has been sent back past our amygdala, right? And has been filtered through, number one, the melanin, the inking, the blocking out of light. All right. Now, the melanin happens in two ways. If you've got brown eyes, if you've got any color eyes, there's going to be two layers of melanin that are on the outside of your pupils. Okay. That's all melanin, by the way. It's not like one color or another color. It's just melanin that's iridescently causing a different color by the spacing in between. In fact, most brown-eyed people are blue-eyed people, but there's an outer coating of melanin that's blocking that. So the blue itself is a light amount of melanin, but there's an outer coating that's on top of it. This melanin, just around the outside of the eyes, I'm not talking about the back of the retinas, just in the irises themselves. I want you to think about when you're watching a football player or someone who goes into battle and they paint the black underneath their eyes. It's allowing more light, right? It gives them better sight. The melanin around our eyes is helping our sight in the very same way that the back of the retinas, the melanin inside there, is helping our sight. It's passing it through this nun. Remember, it's been doing this since the time you were born. Since the very moment you were born, it's been saying, hey, bear with me, but hey, there's a floating bat, a 2 foot tall floating bat who has a Walkman on, and he's listening to the Walkman, and he's hanging out in that tree right now. You're four. Is it okay if I show this to you? And the nun's like, I don't know. Let's see what happens. And so she'll send the signals through, and she'll watch your reaction. She'll watch how you react to it. Okay? And how you react to it is going to determine what you see. More importantly, you're training your amygdala to show you in the future. Your amygdala learns he did not like that. He freaked out when I showed him that. We lost all these calories. We lost this. We lost that. It was a bad move. I don't want to show him that vampire. It doesn't do any good. It doesn't do any good. Now, keep in mind, I'm not saying there's an actual vampire bat there. This is important. I'm saying that there is energy that the brain can only interpret as a vampire bat. It can only interpret it as a Sasquatch, as a UFO, as a snake creature, as a fairy, as a will-o-wisp, as a flying dragon, as an army in China. This book, Wonders in the Sky, who's the author? Jacques Vallée and Chris Obeck. It's not bad. It doesn't go into what I'm talking about. But what I like about this book is that it's a physical documentation. Okay, I don't even know if this is a good one. I just opened it up to page 46. April 34th, AD, China. Exact location unknown. Squadron of flying intruders. A white round object accompanied by 10 small stars flies overhead. This could refer to a train of meteors, but the pattern is unusual if the company means that the 10 small stars were flying in some sort of formation with the main object. 61 AD, China. A golden apparition is said to have spread Buddhism. 776, Seiberg Castle, Germany. 2 flying objects stop a war. Saxons rebelled against Charlemagne to attack the castle of Seiberg. With continued lack of success, finally decided to storm the castle. They reportedly saw the likeness of 2 shields, red with flame, wheeling over the church. When the heathens outside saw this miracle, they were at once thrown into confusion and started fleeing to their camp in terror. Since all of them were panic-stricken, one man stampeded the next and was killed in return. Because those who looked back out of fear impaled themselves on the lances carried on the shoulders of those who fled before them, some dealt each other aimless blows and thus suffered divine retribution. Friendly fire. The reason why I'm bringing up this book is because if you track the dates of those books with technological advancements, you see that when we started flying balloons in France, like hot air balloons, the wonders in the sky became craft. But before we started flying balloons, the wonders in the sky were dragons. And after we developed the airplane, the wonders in the sky became more technologically comfortable. Our amygdala wants you to see everything. She's not like a bitch. Like, she wants you to have as much information as she can. But it's her job to make sure that you don't fall into shock. All right? And because your retinas are always burning, because they're always fully freaking lit, you have a danger. It's you are susceptible to being overloaded with data that your system cannot handle. You are a delicate You are a delicate instrument, and that delicacy gives you fidelity. You need that fidelity to see. If you didn't have that same kind of delicacy, your fidelity would be shot out. It would be like John McAfee yesterday. Like, will you please stick your fist up my ass so I can have an orgasm? It's good that we have this fidelity. And the downside of that fidelity is you need this nun, this amygdala, to step in and make sure your system isn't burnt out. Because your retinas, your rods and cones, they're burnt out every day. Every day they're like, holy fuck, that's intense. They're seeing the pure raw world, and they're not even seeing it raw. Keep in mind, your lens is blocking most of the UV light. And we only see what, 0.7% of the visual spectrum? Prove my lips. It's like 0.7, 0.07. It's really small. And that's not even counting what the lens is doing. The lens is stopping a lot of light before it even hits the pupil, before it even passes on. All right. And all these systems, except for one, all of your senses except for one, has to go back, all the way back to the end of the head, and ask permission. It has to pass through the thalamus before it even gets processed in the back. And the ignorance is funny, but the denial of our own ignorance about the human body is funny, because months ago when I was reading about this, I read, oh, well, the reason why the right brain's over here, the left brain's over here, and they're crisscrossed is purely because evolutionarily speaking, it was important that there was the shortest distance possible between these two centers, and this just happens to be a shorter transit. And that's how I know these people are full of shit, because they never bothered to tell you, explain, well, why the fuck did we put all this stuff in the very back of the brain? Like, why would you want it to route all the way back through here after passing through these other systems? Why would you need to filter light? And the answer is because the eye of Ra doesn't see the world, it renders the world. There's a difference between seeing the world and rendering the world. Your retinas are burning even when you're dreaming. You watch your pet kicking while they're sleeping. Your retinas are kicking while you sleep. You're only able to see something in your dream because dopamine is flowing inside your retinas. It's flowing signals. It's how it memorizes. The retinas themselves are a staging. As an example, you could walk into the auditorium of your retina and turn around, and there's an orchestra of rods and cones all around you. And if you want to know what last night's sunset looked like, you know which retinas, which rods and cones were firing at which signals. And all those signals were coming back and being passed through your system, through your nun, through the filters that it had. It's telling you, what do you want to see? And your brain's giving it the data. I remember I had this emotional reaction to the sunset last night. Oh, well, I know how you got that emotional reaction from the visual part. I don't know how the hearing worked or the smell or anything, but I can give you the visual cue to replay that. Okay, please do. And you have a visual memory that's triggered and brought up in your head. And these memories are not timed in sync with what's actually happening in the world. Your eye's going to see data faster than your sound. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. All of that has to be synced up in some way. And that's why I always go back to the pineal gland. I can't prove this part, okay? This one part. But I believe what this pineal gland does is it's an oscillating needle record, like a record on a needle. But a needle's one dimension. This is a three-dimensional oscillating needle record. It's a diamond in our head. It's listening for the world. And when it gets that signal, it's calling up, just like your dreams do. It's calling up your brain and saying, I've got this signal. How do we express this in the most accurate way that's going to allow my pilot to survive this world? And the sound comes in and goes, hey, I know how to express that in sound. I'm going to ignore this. I'm going to ignore this. I'm going to ignore the colors. I'm going to ignore this. I'm only going to focus on the sound. And your brain's like, hey, that's a good idea. That means I could just listen to something. Your ears are like, I know. And a great idea. And guess what? There's melanin in your freaking ears. There's melanin in your ears. Now, smell's a little different. Smell bypasses all of this neocortex stuff. Smell is allowed to react before the nun gets it. The olfactory is allowed to go, I don't care what that lady says. I see this, and this is important. Screw her. I don't need a hall pass, right? The lab's on fire. I'm just going. We're just going. She can deal with me running. She doesn't have to deal with me asking her permission to run. She can deal with me running. But every other sense comes through her. And it's because of that tells me that our eyes are not on the front lines. It's as if you're in a plane and you're in the back seat. You're not in the cockpit. And there's a camera. And that camera's showing you what the cockpit's seeing. And that sounds like the same. That sounds exactly like the same. In fact, you might say, well, if an eye is the window to the soul, it must see the entire world. And I say, no, it doesn't. Because when you have a window, you don't feel the breeze. You don't see the cold. You don't see the smell. You don't see the breeze. You're not even touching the world. You don't see or feel the hesitation you might have if a squirrel or a bird was to come too close. If it's raining, you would not feel the drops of water, right? None of those things would be happening. Our eyes are told what to render. They're told what to render, we're told what to render based on how much we can absorb. And this is why paranoid schizophrenics who were put in the same room, if they're not on lithium, their hallucinations, which are transient, real, temporal, linear visions they have, perceptions they have, can be in sync. They can see the same things. Same with crystal meth heads. 2 crystal meth addicts can have a conversation with a guy that's not there. They're always reporting this same black shadow, right? With red eyes or green eyes. They're always... Check out Jerry Marzinski's work for this. It's all there. It's all legitimate. The eyes only render. They don't see. I think this pineal gland is what truly sees. I think it's somehow connected through our olfactories, and it's giving the data for us to pull apart and go, I want to hear it. I want to smell it. I want to see it. I want to taste it. And there's more senses, there's I think there's 5 senses, but no, there's 9, right? There's balance. That's a sense. Motion's a sense. Orientation is a sense. But we're only seeing the world through rudimentary tools that it's not actually how we're seeing the world. And we're going to talk about that when we get into blind sight. Before we do, though, I have to bring up Parkinson's. It's believed that possibly Parkinson's is related to this melanin production. And if you look at what Parkinson's is, it's a living PTSD, isn't it? You're watching someone who claims to not have PTSD suffer from PTSD. It's a sensory overload. It's as if their senses are seeing something, but their nun isn't showing it to them. And it's freaking them out. Somehow it's freaking them out. They're not able to deal with it. So dopamine is tied into the retinal function. It's responsible for basically light adaptation, how we adapt to and change the light. And we do this similar. Hang on a second. Melanosomes and blue light absorbing pigments are only responsible for the absorption of 60% of light energy. This implies the presence of other pigments that have not been described yet. One of these pigments might be lipofuscin, fuscin, which accumulates the RPE. That's that membrane I told you about on the end during life. As a light absorbing pigment, lipofuscin might first be beneficial for visual function. And the reason why I wanted you to see that is basically it's not a rod, it's not a cone, it's a pigment. There are other elements at work that are showing you data that your rods and cones will never be able to pick up. There's other information coming in to your visual cue. Thanks for the super chat, Chrissy Shepherd Gravy. I think I missed another from, and I'll find out if I do. Terry, I think I called yours out. Thank you. Let's get to the. So this is just showing you the crossover section, right? You're seeing something. It's crossing over the optic chiasma. I don't know what that means, but there's actually a lot here. There's like a ton of things here. This is its own control center, and then it when it connects here, that's connecting to the amygdala, not directly. It's through the hippocampus, I believe, and then from there, it finally gets back to the occipital lobe where it's rendered upside down or backwards. Now, is it really backwards? I don't know, because what we see, this is part of the exercise. What we see is what we've been able to render. And each of us can render different information based on what we're comfortable with seeing. And that's why PTSD, I think, is so much related. PTSD is all about the amygdala, right? If you have PTSD, you've got a problem in your amygdala. You've got your amygdala is that nurse is living in trauma. And anytime she tries to give you data, your body's rejecting that as saying it's too much. It's too much. It's too much. This is such an important function on all of our systems. But we ignore it. We tell each other this is sight, you know? We tell each other, no, this is how you see. But that's not how we see. It's not. Here's how the amygdala attaches to the hippocampus. It's almost like an antenna, right? Like there's this antenna. You know, the cochlea, that little spiral in your ear. It's only because of that spiral that you're able to hear different tones. It's because as the spiral gets smaller and smaller, the tonal listening gets smaller and smaller too. It's like an antenna test. Can I show you this vampire monkey? No, don't show. Okay, I won't show you that anymore. This is amygdala hijacking, right? The stimulus goes directly to thalamus, and it then goes right to amygdala before a signal reaches the neocortex to process. This survival mechanism lets us react to things before the rational brain has time to mull things over. This is your Parkinson's, and I can't prove that, but this is your Parkinson's, and this is your PTSD. And all these are visual. It's even in between. The eyes, look, here's the visual cortex right there. It's going right through all these systems. It has to. It has to, because you would be blown out. Your system would be blown out. You would be John McAfee. Whoops. man. Just trying to get the top here. Okay. The circadian control is dependent on a circadian clock in the retina. The retina itself has its own circadian clock in it. And watch this, an important transmitter to coordinate phagocytosis and the circadian clock seems to be dopamine. It seems to be. We're still learning about the eyes. We just found new pathways last year into that EPD, that lining I talked about. Here, presence of dopamine receptors linked to adenylate, I don't know what that means, adenylate cyclastic activation suggest that circadian regulation may be mediated through the dopamine melatonin system. Right? Basically, because your eyes are always on, if you've got a circadian rhythm inside, it's going to be able to naturally dull them at night. It's basically the attempt of the nun to say, guys, you don't have to be on guard duty right now. Stop burning so many calories. You're burning all the oxygen out. Stop. Your retinas have water, by the way. It's constantly replacing water to make all this happen because your rods and cones are burning out too fast. You can almost think of it like a water cooling system. I'm not saying that's what it does. I'm just saying that you could almost think about that just to remember it. Your retinas use a lot of water. So dopamine is a messenger. Dopamine acts as a messenger for the eyes. In fact, they found mice and they were able to destroy the dopamine sending blah, blah, blahs, right, of mice. And in doing that, the mice were blind. By cutting off dopamine, mice couldn't see. Let me see where I've got that. All these are linked in the description, including this mice one. I may not have an image of this where I've got it like shown you, like highlighted. This is a perfect chance to go into blind sight. What is blind sight? Blind sight is the ability for you to see without an eye. It can cut your visual cortex, can cut the cord to your visual cortex, and you can still see. And it's not just in humans, it's in animals too. Now, the seeing has some weird things to it. You can detect shapes, you can detect motion, but you can't see third-party motion. This is fascinating because motion would be something's moving. Let's say I don't have this eye, okay? If I can do it. Well, it's in my own hand, but I can perceive, if I don't have this eye, my blind sight can perceive this it can perceive this object, a little owl, Illuminati confirmed, can perceive this object, and it can perceive it moving. It can't predict its movement if it's a third motion moving. It's kind of hard to explain, but what it's telling you is that if your brain has to make a calculation, your brain, if the brain doesn't have the eye, the retina, to see a third motion to it, like how it's being acted on by a third body, it's not able to sense it anymore. It's really fascinating. It's not able to sense it because it needs the eye to finish the math. All right. So without an eye, you can detect emotion. If someone's smiling or if they're sad, you can detect that. You can detect depth. You can detect size. But you can't do it consciously. This is only in humans. If an animal does it, if you take out a monkey's eye, they can perceive all those things better than humans can. Humans have to be forced to guess. If they're forced to guess, it's like, hey, is there a tennis ball over here? And I'm like, I don't know, I can't see over there. And they're like, well, can you guess? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, okay, well, what does it say on the tennis ball? Does it say Penn or Spalding? And you're like, I don't know. I freaking can't see. You guys cut my eye out. And it's like, well, can you guess? And he's like, it's a Penn 7. And you're right. You're freaking right. But you're only doing that if someone's prompting you to guess. But animals, they can do that. They know it's a Penn 7. I hear, well, they can't read. Yeah, but they know it's a Penn 7. Which shows you something crucial. It shows you how much the brain is involved in what it is you're going to see. It's showing the overworking that happens in humans. It's almost like the eye is a desktop, if that makes sense. It's not almost. The eye is a desktop. And your brain is able to place things on this desktop, which gives you a visual representation of where they are, so you can negotiate with them. It's very similar to a three-dimensional engine, a 3D game engine. If you had a character in your game engine and he was shooting a bow and arrow and you had a target, you couldn't play these things until you had an environment for them. So you create a 3D environment, usually with a physics engine. And you would install your character with the physics engine with the target. He shoots the arrow, he hits the target, then you know. But you wouldn't know these things if you didn't have this eye to see them. All right? So what I'm trying to explain to you is that the eye is a theater for the mind. It's a rendered theater of the mind. And even though you can't see, you're still able to reach out and grab something. But only by convincing your mind that you don't need your eye to see it. It's your belief that your brain has in your eye that tells you that's how it happens. It's fascinating stuff. Look up blind sight. This is a real life phenomenon. Thanks for the super chat, Angie K. Thanks so much for being you. My mom has macular degeneration, and this helps so much. Explained very well. Yeah, there's your eye has two totally different seeing systems in it. You know, your perceived vision. We talked about this before, but one's a laser. It's your male vision. It's an obelisk vision. Wherever you point your eye, that's where all your cones are. So you're going to get most of your coloring on. But where you don't point your eye is always going to be this raw format I talked about. It's almost like a black and white, but it's a high resolution black and white. It's a sensitivity setting. Two totally different systems. You can knock out one and keep the other, or knock out the other and keep the one. You can turn off background vision in this eye and keep macular vision, and you can shut off macular vision in this eye and turn on peripheral vision. So that should show you that actually what's inside of our eye isn't even necessarily like a legitimate picture. It's an extrapolation. All right. The eye of Ra is a theater of the mind. I hope I've been showing you that. It's the theater of the mind. And we only allow actors in our theater that fit the playbill. It's like, yeah, we got the 12-foot demon ready to come on stage. And the nun's looking in the playbill going, I don't see him in here. It's like, no, he's right here. Look, check him out. And I was like, oh, yeah. This is PG-13. We cannot put that demon out on the stage right now. It's like, well, what do you want me to do with him? And the nun will even try things like, I will let him read his line off camera. Okay? He can stay behind stage and he can say his line. Right? So you're only getting auditory. Or this happens with schizophrenics. Jerry Marzinski, check him out. This happens with schizophrenics. Or I will only show you a black shadow. He can come on stage, but he's going to have to wear pure black Can he have red eyes? Okay, fine. He can have red eyes. What about green? Or green, that's fine, but nothing else. And we send that out on the stage because your nun wants you to perceive. She wants you to see as much as you can. But she knows what you can and can't handle. She's aware of that. She's like, okay, I got it. These guys can't handle this stuff. Or they can handle it. There are two studies linked below, one a 1995 study, one a 1970 study that show these characteristics of blind sight: the ability to see without an eye, the ability to still see. And I would think it's because you have two eyes, because if you understand this, your eyes are filling in details for each other. We have blind spots in our eyes. There's a spot, right, where the optic nerve comes in, and that's a physical spot that you can't see. Right here is a blind spot. Look at that torus. Forms an actual torus there. That blind spot is filled in by the other eye anyway, right? Because of that, there it is. That's the blind spot right there. That red part. That's you can't. There's no rods or cones there. That's the blind spot. But our other eye fills that in because they're two theaters. Just like in 3D, you've got your 3D classes. You've got two different theaters, and it can show in either one. Either one will work. That's why someone with one eye is still able to do a lot. I'm asking you to look at the eyes backwards. I'm asking you to understand that the rods and cones are sticking in upside down. Those rods and cones are responding to the melanin and the dopamine just as much as they're responding to the photons that are coming in. They're actually responding to this first. And I think if you're in an uncomfortable situation, your eyes start to show you. And if it gets too uncomfortable, your eyes start to hide it from you. This is why two people can look at something and come away with two totally different things. I show people my hummingbird camera all the time. And one of you will see a hummingbird and the other one will see black mold. And I get that, yeah, you could argue this mold is black. I guess it is in color. But the fact is that I live in a very wet climate, and I installed this knowing part of it would be outside. This isn't mold. This is outside. This is my entire outside. Is that? And if I was to bleach this, I would be bleaching all of this. And I don't think that this is here to kill me. I think this is part of nature. It's part of being outside. But you could see either one. You could see either one in that. You could focus on one and not see the other. Same thing happens with government. Same thing happens when you're dating someone who isn't the best for you, right? Or someone who is the best for you. You either overlook or you see their flaws. You focus on them more. If someone's uncomfortable and can't really get into commitment, they're going to see the flaws in their partner. They're going to come out more. Why? Because it's running it past the nun. And it's like, how could I perceive this person? How should I perceive this person now? And the nun just does her homework. That's all. She's watching out for you. She does her homework. She looks through and it's like, I want you to see that zit on her face or his face. I want you to see how out of shape he is, or how out of shape he is, or how in shape he is. We see what's chemically comfortable. Unless you could have some kind of weird procedure. Unless you could go through some weird kind of procedure, just like the mice did, where the mice were automatically blinded because their dopamine receptors, remember, their eyes completely work. The mice's eyes completely worked. The only thing that was removed was the ability for their brain to generate dopamine, for their retinas to generate dopamine. That was the only thing that was changed, and they couldn't see. They could not see without dopamine. And what is dopamine? The quickest way to understand it, it's the pleasure. It's the chemical. Okay, guys, I have to reduce this simply. All right. But if there's like a realist in here who's like, well, you're fucking wrong because dopamine doesn't make you happy. It's actually a neurotransmitter that's relating to something else. It's telling, it's like, okay. But your retina is the number one source of dopamine production in your body. And it's doing that. The pleasure you have when a man looks at a beautiful woman, there's a reason why most of that is visual. It's because that's where all the dopamine is. And when I think about a beautiful woman that I've seen, my mind palace has this stage, this beautiful stage. I've got theater 1 and theater 2, and they work in tandem. It's my left retina and my right retina. And I can place her on that stage, that beautiful woman. I can see her. I can see the beautiful sunset. I can see my dog, even though he's not here. I can see the bird that was here yesterday. And the only reason why I'm able to see them is because I have a stage. I have a rendering platform. And instead of it being a bunch of spotlights, it's a bunch of dopamine. It's a bunch of independent dopamine injectors. Just like there are pixels in your camera, right? That pick up the sensors in your camera. Your retina is the same thing. And yes, it has rods and cones, but what's more important is the dopamine. It's each of those have these different points of dopamine. And there could be a ritual. There could be a procedure that you could go through that instead of cutting off the dopamine, all right, if you've ever been to an eye doctor and they give you that thing where they dilate your pupils, right? And so your pupils are open wide. And then you have to walk home. They did that to me once. And I'm walking out of the hospital. I'm just like bumping into trees and shit. There's nothing I could do but only see. I could only see everything, right? It was impossible. So I want you to imagine that maybe, just maybe, these guys are getting the inhibitors of dopamine are inhibited. I know that's confusing, but the thing that's restricting the dopamine is somehow turned off. And because of that, their eyes are happy with everything. So what does the nun do? The nun sends them a picture of a Sasquatch playing a saxophone. And the dopamine's fine. They're like, yeah, I can render that, no problem. He's not going to freak out. And the nun's like, are you sure? He's like, yeah, no, he's good. Everyone here in the theater is rated R. Everyone's already agreed. Yeah, there's no PG-13 receptors in here. The nun's like, are you sure? He's like, give it to me. I'll prove it. She does. And the theater proves it. Everyone in the theater is like, oh, that's great. And so then the giant demon comes out. Can I get on stage? And the nun's like, why not? Go for it. Go for it. This dude can handle anything. He's bulletproof. How's he bulletproof? Because he had this weird procedure that knocked out his constriction of dopamine. To be as plain as I can, it knocked out his constriction of dopamine. I can't prove these people had this ritual, but it's the thing that makes the most sense to me. It's the all-seeing eye. It's the eye of Ra. And if you were an exclusive club, all right, keep in mind that the Bible didn't tell us about the pyramids. It didn't tell us that there was electricity in Egypt. And UNESCO swears that this is the first time we've been there, and there's never, ever been anything such as an advanced civilization that's been here before. We know they hide data from us. Don't you think that this would be something that they would want to hide from us? I think so. I think this would be an exclusive thing, like, look how cool we are. We know this technology and no one else does. And that there is a procedure that you have to follow to have this thing, because it's only offered in certain ways. And this procedure fits you into a club. And this is prestige. For you to walk out with this in public is to show everyone else in the club, I have the eye of Ra. And they're like, holy shit, that dude has the eye of Ra. And you would want to be around that person because you're now around someone who can see things that you cannot see. I don't know what they would see, guys, because what they see is going to be dependent on what their brain is willing to handle. And I get the feeling, because dopamine is only one limiter, that a Bush might see a reptilian dude, while the Pope might see this Gabriel figure, while what's that fuck's name? Branson would see this giant Baphomet phallus, right? Because he'd want that. He'd be like, yes, I will get, you know. Each of them are going to see things, I think, still differently. They're going to have their own abilities and twists to it. But they're seeing the same kind of energy. It's the same thing that happens with a paranoid schizophrenic when you have two of them. They both see something. They're both doing their best to render it, right? Render it on their stage. And all this points back to the fact that our reality is more about energy than it is about matter. It really does prove, if anything proves it, it's this. You are the center of the universe, and you were surrounded with energy. And you perceive that energy in three-dimensional ways, because that's the best thing your system can do to render it. And it renders it not only in three dimensions in your retina, but it gives you your hearing, it gives you your feeling. Is it cold? Is it hot? Is it wet? Is it hot? Is it sexy? Is it angry? Is it depressing? Is it scary? Is it comforting? Right? You have all these dimensions. And all your senses are here to render your dimensions. It's not here to show you what's outside of you, guys. It's here to render what's inside you. Let me say that again. Your senses are not here to show you what's outside. Your senses are here to render what's inside. And what you're rendering, if you could truly picture what you are, if you follow this analogy with me, if you could truly picture what you are, you're this three-dimensional record needle in the center of your head, right there, and you're listening. You're listening. And this nun is behind the listener, holding your aperture. And that aperture is going to get bigger or smaller, depending on how well you do. If you can see more, it shows you more. If you need to see less, it shows you less. It's the same world. All the data is the same, but your aperture is different. And you've probably heard me say that this is how flat Earth and round Earth works. That you have an aperture up here of ball Earth, and you have an aperture down here of flat Earth. And it goes even further into convex Earth, because people even see that. The true nature of our world is aperturally transient. Sounds, I don't know what you're going to do with that quote, but there it is. Red light is easier to see in blind sight than blue light. What I mean by that is patients that have this blind sight, right? They're missing their eye. They are more perceptive at perceiving red light than they are blue light. And if anyone's looked at the history of the eye, there's a rumor that we were first able to perceive red light, and that we slowly had to develop to see blue and violet. And it has to do with the wavelengths themselves. And it seems to point more truth to the idea that we are in our center and we're distributing what we think we see. We're extruding it through our senses, kind of like that Play-Doh. You know, when you stick the Play-Doh in the extrusion and you squeeze it out, you make Play-Doh girders, right? So I think that's it. I think I covered it all. That's great. I had no idea how long this would take. Um, I had no idea. So, what do you do with this data? Fuck if I know. I wrote this book, Quantum Rapture. This is what I did with this data. I talk about in my character in this book is slowly learning the truth of his senses um, as he immerses himself in his own biology. There's a link to this book in there. Some of you have ordered this book and you don't have it yet because you ordered it directly from me and I'm signing it for you. And I hope I told you all. I tried to tell everyone if you're going to order from me, it's going to take a little bit longer. Those are on the way. They're still coming, but they're not here. It looks like another week, thanks to the publisher. If any of you are tired of waiting and you have to have this book, no problem. Send me an email and I'd be happy to refund that money. You can order right now straight off Amazon if you want. Whatever's easier for you guys. Thank you for those of you who did pre-buy it though. I appreciate that, and I look forward. You also get a little something when you, not just my signature. But anyway, I already said too much. The Eye of Ra. I think I meant to throw this in. I believe that when we undergo childhood trauma, like in the hospital, that moment we start to, our amygdala steps in and starts filtering what we can see from the moment we're born. And I think that she develops habits. She probably tries to save calories and doesn't always show us things. Like, I'm never going to show us the giant spider that's walking through the skyline, the one that's like 17 stories high. Like, I don't think she would ever show us that. It'd be like, no, that's just too much. Don't show it to him. It's I believe that probably is more how it works. So, which means that truth changes, doesn't it? The definition of truth comes back to what I've always said it is, which is zetetic, right? Truth is what you can experience. That is the only form of truth. I would say that knowing is actually an illusion, but experiencing is concrete. If you've experienced something, you hold a sacred connection with that phenomenon. And it's only through experiencing that do you truly know what it is, because each of us will see different things from different angles. So, yeah, the Eye of Ra Ra, right? Think about it that way to remember. The Eye of Ra Ra Ra, kick him in the other knee. The idea is that your dopamine, what's pleasurable to you, what's comfortable to you, is what's going to be shown, right? It's the Eye of Ra Ra. The Eye of Ra Ra. So we'll end it on that one. Thanks for being here, guys. Enjoyed it. And